Hi everyone, it's John. Thanks for coming back to my channel. I've got another book review for you today. It is August 30th, 2021, and I did not post a book review last week. I was a bit busy, but I'm posting one early the next week, and I'll have one on Wednesday as well. And then maybe a Friday Reads this week, too, since I have two new books to talk about that I'm reading. The book I want to talk about is by one of those writers that I had never read before and saw something on Book Outlet by, and the subject just seemed fascinating. So I put it in my cart, and it showed up on my doorstep one day. And it's this. I think I've recently showed it in one of my new sort of book haul-ish videos. It's called The River of Shadows, Eadweard Muybridge, and the Technological Wild West. I don't know if you can see the Technological Wild West. And you can see if you know Muybridge's name, you almost certainly associate him with one image or series of images, which looks very much like the one you see there on the cover. And I'll explain the genesis of why, if you make that mental connection, you have made it. It was a series. It was the result of a relationship that he had with Leland Stanford, the founder of Stanford University, and the senator from California and the governor of California, that I'll talk about in the body of the review. But I'd never read Rebecca Solnit before. I know that she is a relatively well-known novelist and has written a small scat of books that I've heard have been generally well received. So I wanted to read something by her on my own. Outside of historians of maybe photography or the occasional cinephile, the name Eadweard Muybridge, who was born in England actually as Edward Muggeridge, probably doesn't ring many bells for most people. If anything, he's perhaps recognized in passing for his 1870s collaboration with at that time, former California governor and future California senator Leland Stanford, and their mutual interest in trying to tell whether or not the 4 feet of a horse ever leave the ground all at once when a horse is at full canter. And if you take another look at this picture, there was actually among Stanford's friends quite a lively debate on this question. And if you look, you'll see that Muybridge's picture actually verifies that there is a point in time at which all 4 feet are off the ground. So, sort of, if you could sum up Muybridge's life and work in one picture, I love the well-chosen picture. Muybridge's technological innovations reveal that they do, like I just said, which surprised many of his contemporaries and many of Stanford's friends. But aside from his fascination with studying the motion of horses, he led a very fascinating life, too. And in her book, Rebecca Solnit takes Muybridge's life and accomplishments as sort of a centerpiece. It's kind of like a biography, but also couches his life and work within a larger frame of, like the subtitle says, the Wild West. It slowly sort of works outward to the study of his environment, which was the eastern United States, at a time when it was just starting to boom in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. 1860s, 70s, and 80s. And then at the very end, she touches on some some more philosophical aspects, like how changing photographic technology sort of subtly and in some ways not so subtly impacts human perceptions of time and space and motion. Muybridge was born along the shores of the Thames River in 1830. When he was 20 years old, he came to the United States and eventually found himself in San Francisco as a bookseller. When he was 30 years old, in 1860, he suffered from a massive head injury in a stagecoach accident when he was going back home to visit his parents or some relatives back in England. And the stagecoach accident, incidentally enough, happened just maybe about 150 miles from where I live in Texas. It happened outside of Fort Worth. Afterwards, some friends and acquaintances claimed that they experienced in him a significant personality change, during which he grew more introverted and less observant of social customs and mores. I guess what we could sort of call he grew a little bit more eccentric. And this has led later neuroanatomists, neurophysiologists to believe that Muybridge's injury may have been akin to the orbitofrontal cortex lesion that Phineas Gage had, and he suffered just 12 years before in 1848. It was after his accident that Muybridge began to develop a real fascination for photography. And his first exhibitions of work consisted mostly of nature photography and mostly of work done in the Yosemite Valley. These images were among the first which would really earn him worldwide recognition for his work. One of the recurrent themes that Rebecca Solnit explores is how the West, rife with these sort of connotations of self-mythologization and constant reinvention, was the perfect place to go and completely reconstruct oneself. Muybridge engaged in this with a series of name changes throughout his career. Obviously, he was, like I already mentioned, he was born Muggeridge, but when he came to the United States, changed his name to Muybridge. He went on to later use Muybridge and Muggeridge, and finally settled on Muybridge in the 1860s. And during a trip home to England in 1882, he changed the spelling of his first name to the spelling that you see here, which appears to be some sort of an Anglo-Saxon spelling. There's Eadweard instead of the traditional spelling that he was born with. And you can't really help but thinking of the smirk that might have crossed his face when looking up a name under which to display his early photography, which was Helios. During the late 1860s and 1870s, Muybridge immersed himself in photography, twice accompanying Carleton Watkins, where he made gigantic plates of natural scenery around him. And he also took countless photographs of the landscapes and cityscapes in San Francisco, and also of cloud banks. He was absolutely fascinated with clouds. It wasn't until the middle part of Muybridge's career that he became more and more interested not just in photography itself, but in how photography helped manipulate human perceptions of time and space. Around this time, he was approached by Leland Stanford to ask whether his favorite horse, whose name was Occident, ever lifted all four of his legs off the ground. He was able to take photographs of Occident at speeds of about 1,000 photos per second. He went on to engage in time and motion studies of anything you could pretty much imagine. He didn't just film horses either. He filmed all kinds of animals. Anything he could get his hands on that moved, he would take pictures of. And he also took pictures of humans, including one picture called Amputee Walking with Crutches. And the titles of these pictures are sort of very un-PC, but Legless Boy Climbing in and Out of Chair is the name of another one. But in 1880, Muybridge invented what he called the zoopraxiscope, which is a sort of a spinning disc with a number of bores in it, a number of apertures. So if you spin them quickly enough, it appeared to result in a continuous moving image. Now, not only was he an accomplished photographer and an inventor, but also one of the pioneers of early cinema. In 1826, 22 years after Muybridge's death, Virginia Woolf wrote in response to the burgeoning world of cinema, "The eye licks it all up instantaneously, and the brain, agreeably titillated, settles down to watch things happening without bestirring itself to think." One of the major criticisms of cinema was that it consisted of a flood of images, which the eyes were forced to take in faster than the mind could possibly process. Whether or not Muybridge anticipated such a massive consciousness-shifting change in the gradual conversion from a largely text-based culture, reading culture, to an image-driven one is unknown, but it's an irrevocable one nonetheless, and one that he played a major part in. As far as the writing goes, Solnit's prose is readable and engaging enough, not as compelling necessarily as I would have thought it had been, considering the praise a lot of her books get, but my interest in the subject and sort of his fascinating life is, I thought, was more than enough to carry it along, and it is not, in all fairness, a very long book. So I think we're talking, on the order of 260 pages here. In some ways, Solnit uses Muybridge as a tool to talk about wider themes in America in the 19th century, which is, quite a feat for you to do if you want to limit yourself to 250 to 260 pages. But sometimes it's a little bit unclear precisely which theme she wants to shine a light on with a particular example. But nevertheless, she reintroduces the reading public, if you didn't already know his name, to a figure whose contributions have forever shaped the way in which we view moving objects on a screen. And I don't think there's a lot of new scholarly ground being visited here in the book. Probably a lot of this is just her own investigation, her own retelling from having read some of his other biographers. But, it's a popular narrative. You don't really expect a lot of new ground being tread. And, respectively speaking, Muybridge is kind of not exactly a household name, and he should probably get a little bit more attention than he deserves. I would have loved to see the theme of the West, the Wild West, and the mythologization aspect, the reinvention, like he did with his name, emphasized more. I thought that would have made the book a little bit more interesting. She does do it at a couple of points in the book, but it only takes up maybe a paragraph or two each time she mentions it. If she would have dedicated maybe a whole chapter to the Wild West and invention of the self, that would have made, that would have been right up my alley, because that's a very sort of me thing, I guess. But I think someone, I might keep an eye out for in the future if I ever see that she writes something that strikes my interest like this again. This is Rebecca Solnit's book on the life of Eadweard Muybridge, called River of Shadows. Eadweard Muybridge and the Technological Wild West. Thanks, and I will see everyone on Wednesday.